How should we respond when we see evil and injustice in the world? Tales of the Jedi came out last week on Disney Plus. It's an animated anthology of about 6 episodes. Dave Filoni is back, and it's a cool little show. My review is coming up next. But first, please hit the subscribe bell and button there. If you want a free epic fantasy book, then go into the description. There's a link for you there. All right, let's do it. Welcome back to Great Stories Change the World, the YouTube channel in which a fantasy science fiction author, that's me, goes over movies and TV shows and books and different things from a writing perspective, analyzes them, shows what's great or what's not so great about them, and reviews different things that are coming out. Today we are doing Tales of the Jedi, Star Wars anthology, animated, that has just come out on Disney Plus. Now, in the comic books, as a comic book nerd, there was a comic book series for Star Wars that was called Tales of the Jedi, but this would go over some other characters that they usually would make up and create to kind of have like different stories about, where they would create things that would happen over thousands of years in the Old Republic and that sort of thing of the Jedi and how they started and different characters and different storylines. And it was a cool little series, and that's really not what they're doing with this. Filoni has brought in these 6 episodes, and this is kind of his thing. He created this, and what he wanted to do was to focus on 2 different characters. All right, so he's focusing on Count Dooku and doing some background information there, and then he's going over Ahsoka, which is his creation, and he's doing some more kind of background information there. And so there's 6 episodes total. It's the same animation style that you got with the Clone Wars and that sort of thing. So it looks very similar. If you're a fan of the Clone Wars, you're definitely going to love this show, this anthology. And again, there's 3 episodes on each of these 2 characters. Now, he's also bringing in Qui-Gon Jinn, bringing in Mace Windu, and some, different characters, Bail Organa, that we get from the comic books and from the Clone Wars and from the prequels and that sort of thing. So it's pretty cool. If you're a big fan of Star Wars, you've probably watched it, and it's definitely worth watching. So the first episode is called Life and Death. So I'm just going to go over a couple things here. Life and Death, I love this episode because we get kind of an origin story for Ahsoka. It's about her mom. So Ahsoka's born, and then we get the mom taking Ahsoka out as a toddler baby, maybe 6 months old, I don't know, somewhere in there, to go hunting. So the mom goes out hunting, and we get to see a lot of stuff about Ahsoka's home planet and kind of her people and her species or race or whatever you might call it, from who she is. And this is sort of an origin story, like I said, and they kind of have this conflict with this space tiger creature, and it's a cool episode. Of course, just full disclosure, Ahsoka is one of my top 5, maybe 3 characters in all of Star Wars. I think she is one of my favorites and one of the best characters for sure. And George Lucas didn't really come up with her. I mean, I think he signed off on her when they did the Clone Wars, but this is a Filoni creation. She is amazing and awesome, and I just love her in everything that she's been in. So it was a great first episode. I really like this one. The second episode is called Justice. So we're switching to Count Dooku. So now we're going to get Count Dooku, and this is a younger Count Dooku when he is a Jedi Master, and his Padawan is Qui-Gon Jinn. So what's cool is that Liam Neeson's son does the voice for this young Qui-Gon Jinn, which I thought was pretty cool, right? And this is this situation where they're being called in to help mediate or the situation between the citizens of this planet and the senator, who is a representative of this planet, and somebody's kidnapped the senator's son, and they get kind of embroiled in this conflict. And through it, we see kind of the corruption that's been going on in the Senate. And we see how people don't really trust the Jedi a lot. They really see there's this corruption going on with the Senate, and the Jedi are kind of like the police force, the strong arm of the law sort of thing, and they don't really trust the Jedi. And we kind of see this conflict starting within Count Dooku. We see his anger, and we see this sort of beginning for him as he's getting into the dark side. Now, we all know, that's not a spoiler, right? We all know he's going to end up becoming a Sith Lord. But I love the way they set this one up to show that there is some corruption. And kind of as I said in the introduction, this is kind of a running theme throughout these episodes. There's corruption. Not everything's perfect. The Jedi Council isn't perfect. The Jedi organization and community isn't perfect. The Senate isn't perfect. Senators aren't perfect. There's all sorts of things that are going on. And so this is starting to frustrate Count Dooku here. And his desire for justice, which I think we all have, is starting to tempt him maybe in the wrong direction with anger and violence, possibly, instead of maybe some different ways that he could go, right? So I like that one. And then in episode 3, we get choices. And now Mace Windu is along with Count Dooku. So we don't see Qui-Gon Jinn in this one, but we see Mace Windu and a younger Mace Windu, and Count Dooku is a little older, and they're going to this planet to kind of deliver kind of the dead body or get the dead body of a Jedi, someone who has died in service to a senator. And there's something fishy going on. Mace Windu is seen as like this rule follower, and he's like, look, we're just supposed to get the body or deal with this, and we're not supposed to really check anything out or do any sort of investigation. And Count Dooku goes beyond what the council wants him to do, and he kind of figures some stuff out, and he starts to do an investigation. So that's the second one. And again, we get cool kind of character with Mace Windu, and we get some lightsaber stuff, and we get some lightsaber stuff in the second episode as well, Justice. So again, this is just furthering kind of Count Dooku's sort of questioning of the council and the questioning of their methods and all that sort of stuff, right? So then we get to number 4. Episode 4 is called The Sith Lord. And in this one, we really see how Count Dooku is tempted and his kind of final steps where he goes into this situation with Palpatine and stuff like that, right? And here's where it can get a little sort of not convoluted, but a little confusing for people if you haven't seen the prequels, because they're showing you scenes that have happened that weren't in the movies, that like little interactions that would have happened. Now, what's cool about this episode, number 4, The Sith Lord, is we're introduced to Master Yaddle, who looks a lot like Yoda. So this is kind of an interesting Jedi Master who is also kind of the same species as Yoda and Grogu, Baby Yoda, that we get later. And this is Filoni, and he's giving us this sort of new character that we've never seen before, this Jedi Master. So it's kind of interesting that he's kind of sticking this in here. We don't learn a lot about Master Yaddle. I mean, Yaddle, she's in there, and she does a lot. And it's really cool. It's a great episode. It's sad, but it's noble, and there's a lot of cool stuff that happens in it. But this is probably one of my favorites, if not my favorite one. And then with number 5, we get Practice Makes Perfect, and we're going back to Ahsoka now, where Anakin is deciding to train her and be really hard on her. Now, Anakin has been through war. He's been through some battles. He's fought different things. And so he's trying to get Ahsoka to be strong. And so in this one, we really see his methods of training her to make her as strong as he possibly can get her to be, to use the Force and be faster and develop her fighting style and all that sort of stuff, so she can survive and be a great Jedi. And the Clone Wars guys, the clones are involved, clone soldiers are involved. And those troopers, here's where you see them start to really develop a relationship. So this is a cool kind of behind the scenes thing. But again, if you haven't seen the Clone Wars, some of this stuff isn't going to be as deep for you, and that last scene in that episode may not make a whole lot of sense because they're referring back to something that happened in the Clone Wars, which is a great TV show if you haven't seen it, but there's a lot of stuff. We haven't seen those episodes, right? And lastly, we have Resolve. Resolve is the last episode of the 6, and it's back to Ahsoka. And this kind of picks up first right after, Revenge of the Sith and the death of Padme and all that sort of stuff. And she just goes into hiding. Ahsoka goes into hiding. She's like, I don't want to be part of this anymore. And we kind of see that in the last season that Filoni was able to kind of complete with the Clone Wars a couple years ago, which is another great series. That was a great season. Love that. But she kind of wants to hide, and something happens, right, that kind of pulls her into the rebellion that's starting to form with Bail Organa and some different things. So that's a really cool episode too. It's loosely based on a book that came out called Ahsoka. So there's kind of a storyline in there that episode is loosely based on. And I think that what Filoni's trying to do with that one is kind of help set up the live action Ahsoka show that's coming out soon. I'm a few months. I can't remember exactly when it's supposed to come out. So those are the 6 episodes. And I think my favorite is still the Sith Lord one. I think that one is great. My second favorite is probably the Resolve, the last one, just because I kind of like that sort of interplay. So for Count Dooku, the theme of, look, he sees the corruption, he sees all the stuff that's going on, the council isn't acting like it should. His reaction is to kind of use that frustration and anger and kind of go against the council, and he ends up being seduced by the dark side, right? Palpatine, and that's what we see happening kind of in the movie. That's where he's at in the movie with Attack of the Clones, and then obviously at the beginning of Revenge of the Sith. So that's his reaction. And when you think about it, this is a very complex idea to kind of put in a kids show. But of course, not a lot of kids it's not just only kids that are watching this, right? It's old people like me doing it too. But it's still kind of a complex idea of how do we react to injustice. And we can easily be swayed into doing things that are wrong and justifying it because other people are wrong, right? And my mom used to say, 2 wrongs don't make a right, And so we have to kind of be careful and check our own motivation and our own, perspective when we kind of react against injustice. How are we not becoming like the thing that we want to fight? And then on the other side, we have Ahsoka. Ahsoka, who at first she just backs off. She's like, look, there's all this junk going on. There's wars. There's the Empire starting and the Sith win. And her friend Padme dies. And so she decides to just go hide. And that's another reaction that a lot of people have, right? We're just not going to deal with it. We're not going to vote. We're not going to do anything. It's just all corruption. And we feel powerless. And so we just kind of withdraw. And that's what Ahsoka does at the beginning. But then she learns that she has to get involved. She has to get involved with the cause of fighting evil, but she's going to fight it by, spoiler alert, right? Protecting others, protecting the innocent, doing it for the citizens, right? Instead of just, becoming evil herself. And that's part of what she's kind of wrestling with. And we see some of that arc in her at the end of the Clone Wars, that last season that they did a couple of years ago, like I said, finishing out the Clone Wars, which, again, I love. That was part of what happens is she leaves or had left the Jedi Order because she just didn't think they were doing things the right way. But her response wasn't to become Sith, right? Her response was she should just leave and just kind of go off and not be a Jedi, not do any of that stuff at all. But again, we see how she kind of comes back into the rebellion, which we see in the show Rebels. Okay, so I don't know why they don't give Filoni complete and total control of the Star Wars universe. I don't have anything personally against Kathleen Kennedy, but as we've just seen with some of her decisions, especially with the sequels, it's just not great story. There aren't great decisions. They're not really Star Wars. She wants to be new and fresh, but it just kind of falls flat. And it's just regurgitated stuff when it's okay. But when we see Filoni get involved, man, everything that he's done within the Star Wars universe is amazing. And he really had like a master's class in Star Wars when he was working on the Clone Wars. Okay, so he worked closely with George Lucas, kind of picking his brain along the way, because he didn't, I mean, he knew what had happened, right? Because they did the Clone Wars after Revenge of the Sith, but you know, he just kept picking George Lucas's brain, and George Lucas was really involved. And it's like, yes, do this or don't do this, and you know, kind of made some things happen. George Lucas was in control. So over those few seasons that that Filoni was involved, and he had another great sort of master class working with you know, Avatar, The Last Airbender. So with all of this background, man, his Star Wars stuff is so amazing. It's true to the heart of Star Wars and good versus evil, but also complex and asking complex questions. And here's the thing. I have a review on the Rings of Power, and I'll just kind of throw this in there. Rings of Power needs to learn from what Dave Filoni did. Right? We know what's going to happen with these characters. We know what's going to happen with Ahsoka in Rebels. We know what's going to happen with Count Dooku in the prequels and all that sort of stuff. But he still gives us great stories with stakes that tell us something, and he can surprise us a little bit. And he didn't even need to use brand new characters to do it. It's just masterful writing, and it's something that, for me as a writer, and for if you're a creative and a writer too, something that we can really appreciate. It's very hard to do what he did with this. Now, as I've already kind of mentioned, the one negative about the Tales of the Jedi, these 6 episodes, is that there are moments where they skip time, and they don't really tell you that they're skipping time, and they don't really tell you this next situation. They don't set it up enough to let you know, like, oh, we're in Attack of the Clones now, or we're in this other sort of situation, or between movies or whatever. And if you don't know the Clone Wars and the prequels really well, then you could get a little lost. Now, there's some Easter eggs in here, especially with Kanan Jarrus shows up again, which is another one of Filoni's creations from Rebels, a great character, and he's kind of has been popping up like in the Bad Batch and some other things. Very interesting, very cool. But you know, all that sort of stuff you won't get, and you could be a little confused if you haven't seen, especially the Clone Wars and the prequels, which most Star Wars fans have at least seen episodes 1, 2, and 3. All right, so I really enjoyed this. I think it's great. I think there's some promise with, especially with Master Yaddle. Like, who is she, and where does she come from, and are a lot of the people of that race, are they just all strong in the Force, you know, like Master Yoda and Baby Yoda, Grogu, whatever? And maybe we're going to see some of that in Mandalorian 3. Maybe he's giving us a little kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudge about where he's going with Mandalorian 3, Season 3. So I dig it. So let me know what you thought of Tales of the Jedi. If you watched it, put it in the comments. Remember to subscribe and like this videos. Subscribe so you can see more great content. I'm going to have more stuff coming out. There's Wakanda Forever is coming out. There's a lot of stuff coming out. I've got a lot of stuff to watch and review. All right. So, and if you want a free ebook, if you are an epic fantasy fan, if you like this sort of stuff, then go into the description and click that link and get that ebook. All right. So until next time, it's Britt Mooney, MB Mooney, signing off. See you later. Peace.